Well, the Washington Post and the Associated Press, citing anonymous sources, say a district attorney in the state of New York is convening a grand jury. And they say the legal proceedings will decide on indicting former President Donald Trump, pointing towards criminal charges. Now, Jackruti Dawe is joining us from Washington, D.C. with the latest. Jackruti, morning from Beijing. First of all, what more do we know about this grand jury?
Yeah, this was first reported by the Washington Post, and they say that the District Attorney for Manhattan, Cyrus Vance, convened a grand jury recently. The report said that it would be they would be sitting 3 days a week for around 6 months, and they'd be going through evidence, documents gathered by prosecutors relating to Donald Trump's business empire, and that these proceedings would be happening behind closed doors. Now, some experts have suggested that this move might indicate that the Manhattan DA has some kind of evidence of crimes somewhere relating to Donald Trump's business empire. But the Washington Post also reports that it's too early to say, and there's no indication yet as to whether prosecutors are going to be asking the grand jury to pronounce any indictments. The statement issued by Donald Trump called the seating of the grand jury a continuation of the greatest witch hunt in American history, and he said that this is purely political.
All right, thank you very much, Jackruti Dawe, joining us from Washington, D.C. Now, our independent current affairs commentator, Aina Tangan, is joining us in the studio to discuss this. Well, first of all, Aina, would you please walk us through how a grand jury really works in the U.S.?
Okay, so grand juries are used in 48 states, and what they are is a check on the prosecution. Because if you're the prosecutor, you can certainly charge somebody, and the question is, do you have enough evidence to do it? Because you can ruin people's reputations. So grand juries have been used a lot. In New York, they impanel up to 23 people. They need 16 to participate in terms of a quorum, and they need 12 of those to agree that the charges go forward. Now, this is not a trial. What they're doing is just looking at the sufficiency of the evidence brought by the prosecution to see whether or not they agree that this is true, that this should go forward.
So it's rather a probe.
It can be a probe, and that's what's very interesting. You remember in the Watergate days, there were grand jury investigations, right. And there's supposed to be a way of making sure that the political process doesn't get involved. But there's always ways to game the system.
Right, and this case actually has been the civil probe, actually, but now, as we heard, some criminal components have been added by the General Office, Attorney General Office. So what will this change bring to all the charges or indictment?
Well, a couple of things you need to know. First off, the Attorney General is joining with the Borough of Manhattan. They both had separate investigations. Now they're joining them together. Why is that important? Because now they can share information that each had garnered independently. And there might be some overlaps, and there might be new information that makes sense in this kind of overall picture. Now, what Donald Trump really has to be careful of is that they could invoke something called RICO, Racketeering, Influence, and Corruption Act. And if that is used, they don't have to prove that Donald Trump did anything, just that his organization committed crimes. You'd have to commit 2 in a 10-year period. And in that case, they can invoke RICO. They can put you in jail for profiting, for getting some benefit from this organization. They use this against the mafia very successfully to shut them down. So if this in fact happens, he could lose not only his liberty, but his entire fortune, and those of his family who were involved could also face the exact same thing, loss of their going to jail and also loss of their money.
Well, let's bear in mind that this person who are now being indicted is not anybody else. It's a former US President, Donald Trump. So Donald Trump has always been claiming all this as a witch hunt. So what would happen if he will be eventually hunt down and put into prison, what will happen to the Republicans and to the whole political environment in the U.S.?
Well, if you believe that, you should be backing Liz Cheney, because she will emerge as the hero, as somebody who stood up to somebody who has been convicted of corruption. Now remember, this has nothing to do with his political activities. What this has to do with his dealings as a private individual through his corporation. And the evidence that has been gathered so far points to things like what he said to banks in terms of what buildings were worth, what he said to insurance companies about these buildings were worth, and what he actually filed with the tax authorities. Things. Now, cases like this are almost impossible to defend, because what you do is you have written evidence submitted by the defendants saying that these were the case, and you really can't say much except, well, I didn't know. But then they can bring in RICO and say, but you were part of an organization that benefited from this. So he's in very, very difficult situation. You start, wondering about, is there a risk flight? All right, he's a very wealthy guy. He has jets.
Where would he go then?
And well, this is the question. But my point is, there's so many different permutations. A lot of his supporters supported him because he said, I'm going to, quote, drain the swamp, unquote. If in fact it's shown that he is more corrupt or just as corrupt as the people he said he was going to fight, you could see a lot of his supporters drifting away, saying that they were fooled by a con man and a criminal if he was convicted.
All right, thank you very much, our current affairs commentator, Aina Tangen. Thank you very much for her insight.